the arena's laughter. The sun blazed high above the massive circular arena, its rays casting long shadows across the sandy floor. The crowd, packed into the stands that surrounded the fighting pit, buzzed with excitement. This was no ordinary fight. This was a battle that had been talked about for weeks. The undefeated champion, a towering warrior with muscles like steel, was about to face an opponent who seemed out of place. The girl stood in the center of the arena, her feet planted firmly on the ground. She was small, barely taller than the average human, and her body was lean, not what anyone would expect from a fighter. She wore simple clothes, nothing special to make her stand out, and her face, while calm, held a slight determination in her eyes. She wasn't trembling, but there was an edge to her that the crowd didn't expect. Around her, the spectators jeered and laughed. Whispers floated through the air, a mixture of mockery and disbelief. The sound was deafening as the crowd looked down at the girl, their laughter echoing against the stone walls of the arena. "Is this a joke?" one of them shouted, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "What is she going to do? Dance around the champion?" Another voice chimed in. "She's dead before she even begins. No one survives against the champion." The girl didn't flinch. She stood still, her gaze never leaving the opposite side of the arena, where her opponent, the champion, was preparing for the battle. The crowd's laughter only grew louder. It was clear, no one believed in her. They saw only a weak girl who had no business being in the arena, let alone facing a warrior like the champion. The champion was everything the girl was not. He was massive, standing nearly 2 heads taller than her, his body a mountain of muscle and power. His eyes burned with a confident arrogance as he stepped into the arena, his footsteps shaking the ground beneath him. The crowd roared in approval, chanting his name, their voices rising higher and higher with each passing second. "Vorkan, Vorkan, Vorkan." He raised his arms, basking in the crowd's adoration. He was used to this. He was used to being the star, the undefeated champion who crushed anyone who dared step into his arena. This girl, she was just another distraction, a blip on his record, a fight he could easily win. He sneered at her from across the pit, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "I hope you're ready to lose," he called out, his voice deep and booming. But the girl remained silent, her face impassive. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The crowd's laughter turned into more taunts. "Come on, little girl, show us what you've got," one person yelled, while another added, "Maybe she'll cry after the first punch." But still, the girl said nothing. She didn't even look at the people laughing at her. Her focus was on the champion, her mind already working, calculating. She was calm, almost too calm for someone in her position. The arena might have been mocking her, but she wasn't here to entertain them. She was here for a reason, and the audience had no idea what was about to hit them. The gatekeeper, the man in charge of the fights, raised his hand, signaling for the battle to begin. The arena fell into a hushed silence. The champion cracked, his knuckles, the sound echoing through the arena like thunder, while the girl only shifted her weight, preparing herself. The jeering, the laughter, it was all just noise to her. And as the battle began, the sound of laughter slowly started to fade, but only because something else was about to take its place, something far more dangerous. The champions smirked. The arena was still buzzing, the excitement palpable in the air. Every eye was fixed on the small girl in the center of the pit, while the champion, Vorkan, stood across from her, a towering figure of strength and arrogance. His eyes gleamed with superiority, as though he already saw the girl's defeat written in the air. The audience, already certain of the outcome, held their breath in anticipation, waiting for the moment when this fight would be over, before it even began. Vorkan cracked his neck, the sound of his joints popping echoing across the arena. He stretched his massive arms, flexing his muscles, showing off his strength. Every move he made screamed dominance, a warrior who had never known failure. He was used to the arena being a place of victory, a place where no one could challenge him. He had crushed countless opponents, each one weaker than the last, and this girl? She was no different. To him, she was nothing more than a small, fragile insect waiting to be squashed under the heel of his boot. He couldn't help but smirk. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Vorkan's voice boomed across the arena, loud and dripping, with mockery. The crowd laughed with him, the sound growing in volume. The girl didn't respond, she didn't even flinch. Vorkan took a slow step toward her, his boots pounding the sand with each deliberate stride. "You must have mistaken this arena for a playground," he continued, his smirk widening. "It's too late to turn back now, little girl. You're in over your head." The audience roared with laughter. They loved every moment of it, seeing the mighty champion toy with his opponent before delivering the crushing blow. They knew the girl didn't stand a chance. Not against someone like Vorkan. But the girl, despite the jeers, despite the odds stacked against her, remained unmoving. She was silent, her expression unreadable. Her eyes locked onto the champion with an intensity that was unsettling, almost as if she could see through him. Vorkan, growing more confident by the second, swung his arm in a wide arc, signaling the start of the fight. The crowd quieted in anticipation, ready for the show to begin. But what happened next was anything but expected. The champion rushed toward her, his speed surprisingly swift for someone of his size. The sand beneath his feet kicked up in clouds, his massive form charging with the force of a warhammer. He threw a punch, a devastating, bone-shattering punch aimed straight at the girl's head. But she didn't move. The punch sliced through the air, but instead of hitting its mark, it passed right through an empty space. The girl was gone. In the blink of an eye, she had vanished from the spot where she had stood. Vorkan froze for a split second, his fist still slicing through the air where the girl had been. His eyes searched the arena, his mind trying to process what had just happened. How had she disappeared so quickly? Then a faint movement to his left caught his eye. She was already there. In that split second, the girl appeared beside him, her body angled in a perfect position. Without warning, she drove her fist into the side of his ribs, a blow that made the air around them crackle with tension. The audience gasped, stunned by the sudden shift in the fight. Vorkan staggered back, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. His massive frame was powerful, but it was clear that this girl, despite her size, had strength unlike anything he had expected. She didn't wait for him to recover. As he stumbled backward, she closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, moving with an agility he couldn't match. The crowd fell silent, unsure of what they were witnessing. Vorkan, now irritated and off balance, glared at her. His confidence was slipping, but the anger rising within him was clear. "You think you can hurt me?" he sneered, wiping blood from his lip. "You're just a joke." But in that moment, the girl's eyes narrowed, her body tensing as she prepared herself. The crowd was now hanging on to every movement, every breath, uncertain of what was coming next. And for the first time, it was the champion who felt unsure. A mini underestimating the Deathworlder. The arena had fallen eerily quiet, the sounds of the crowd's jeering now replaced with uneasy murmurs. The girl had done something that no one, not even the great champion, had expected. She had struck him, hit him in a way that didn't seem possible for someone so small. And Vorkan, the undefeated champion, was visibly shaken. But Vorkan was no stranger to adversity. He wasn't called the champion for nothing. He had faced many fighters who thought they could win, many who underestimated him, and every time they had fallen. The thought of him losing here in front of so many spectators was unimaginable. His pride burned hotter than ever. With a deep, rumbling growl, he gripped the hilt of his battle axe, his weapon of choice. The gleam of steel caught the sun as he raised it high, his muscles tensing. "You think you can beat me?" His voice boomed across the arena, full of fury. "You're nothing but a distraction." The girl didn't respond. She didn't even look at him. Instead, her eyes scanned the arena. She was taking in every detail. The way Vorkan shifted his weight, the faint movements in his posture, and the way his breath quickened. She wasn't just standing there. She was studying him, learning him, and it was clear she had no intention of playing his game. The crowd, at first stunned into silence, slowly began to murmur again. Some of them started to whisper about her. She was different, that much was clear. But they still didn't believe she stood a chance. Vorkan was unstoppable. He was a legend. What could she possibly do to defeat someone like him? "Come on, little girl," one of the spectators called out, his voice mocking. "This is a fight, not a dance. Show us what you've got." But still she remained silent. Her stance was steady. She wasn't backing down. Vorkan, growing more impatient, swung his battle axe with a roar. The weight of the weapon seemed to shake the very ground beneath them as it sliced through the air, a blur of steel aimed straight for her. The audience collectively held their breath. This was it. He would crush her in an instant. The girl didn't move. The weapon was mere inches from her, and still she stood there unflinching, her eyes locked on the champion. Then, at the last possible second, she ducked. Her body moved with the grace of a predator, low to the ground, her movements swift and fluid. The axe missed her by a fraction, the blade grazing the air where her head had been just moments before. The crowd gasped. No one had expected her to dodge like that. No one had expected her to be so fast, so precise. Vorkan stumbled forward, his momentum carrying him off balance. For the briefest moment, he was vulnerable. The girl saw it. She saw the opening in his defense. Before anyone could react, she was there. In a blink, she closed the distance between them, her hand coming up to strike. But it wasn't the blow the crowd was expecting. Instead of a simple punch or kick, she shifted her weight and used his own force against him, sending him reeling, with a powerful elbow to the side. Vorkan grunted as the impact sent him stumbling. His armor creaked under the pressure, but he barely managed to stay on his feet. His eyes widened in disbelief. This wasn't just some lucky move. She was skilled. And the confidence he had in his own abilities, in his own invincibility, began to crumble just a little. The crowd, once sure of his victory, now watched in stunned silence. Some began to question, was this girl really as weak as they had thought? Vorkan, humiliated and enraged, twisted to face her again, fury burning in his chest. He could feel the sting of the blow still in his ribs, and the girl's calm demeanor only made it worse. "You dare challenge me?" His voice was low, dangerous and full of venom. But the girl simply tilted her head, her eyes never leaving him. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet confidence that made Vorkan pause. He had underestimated her. That much was certain. But the question still lingered. Could this girl truly defeat him? Or was she just playing a dangerous game she didn't understand? The audience was silent, caught in the tension of the moment, and for the first time, it felt like the arena was holding its breath. A hint of something different. The silence in the arena was almost deafening now, a sharp contrast to the laughter that had filled the air just moments before. The crowd, still on edge from the girl's unexpected counterattack, watched as the tension between her and Vorkan thickened. The champion's fury was clear in his eyes, but the girl remained eerily calm. Vorkan paced in front of her, his eyes scanning her every move, his mind racing. He had never encountered an opponent like this before. She wasn't just fast. She wasn't just skilled. There was something different about her. With a low growl, Vorkan raised his axe once again, this time taking a step back to steady himself. The crowd was waiting, hanging on every second, every movement. But the girl didn't respond. She stood still, watching him closely, her eyes unreadable but sharp. For a moment it looked as if she was waiting for something. The audience didn't know what, but there was an air of anticipation about her that felt almost unnatural. The more Vorkan studied her, the more unsettled he became. His fists clenched around his weapon as he prepared to strike again. But something in the back of his mind kept telling him to be cautious. This girl was unlike anything he had ever faced. A flash, Vorkan lunged forward, his battle axe aimed with deadly precision. The blade whistled through the air, cutting a path straight for the girl's chest. The crowd gasped, sure that the fight was about to end, but instead of dodging or blocking the attack, the girl did something Vorkan hadn't even considered. She stepped forward. In one fluid motion, she moved directly into the path of the axe, but not in a way that invited disaster. She wasn't trying to meet the strike head-on. She was moving with the axe, her body twisting in perfect harmony with the swing. Her movements were so calculated, so precise, that it was almost as if she anticipated every second of the attack before it even happened. The moment the blade neared her, she grabbed the shaft of the axe with a single hand, her fingers curling around it like steel, stopping it in midair. The crowd's collective gasp echoed in the arena, a mix of awe and disbelief. Vorkan froze, his eyes wide in shock. How was this possible? The force of his swing was enough to shatter bones, and yet she had stopped it with ease. Her grip was unyielding, but her expression was still calm, almost serene. For a heartbeat, the two of them were locked in a silent struggle, the massive champion against the small, seemingly fragile girl. It was a moment of stillness where time seemed to stretch and the entire arena held its breath. And then, without warning, she twisted the axe in her hand. Vorkan's eyes widened as his weapon was suddenly wrenched from his grasp. The girl's movements were lightning fast, her muscles coiling and releasing like a predator in the wild. She flung the axe to the side, sending it skittering across the arena floor with a single motion, and Vorkan was left standing there, weaponless. The crowd was in absolute shock. They had expected her to struggle, to be overwhelmed, to fall beneath the champion's strength. But instead, she had turned the tables in an instant. Vorkan stumbled backward, his face flushed with confusion and anger. He had been in countless battles, but nothing like this. No one had ever done this to him. He had always been in control. Always. The girl took a single step forward, her eyes locked onto his with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through him. She didn't need to say anything. Her actions had already spoken louder than words. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting to win. And every moment, every movement she made was part of a plan that was slowly unfolding, slowly making sense to everyone watching. For the first time, Vorkan hesitated. Something about her had shifted the momentum of the fight completely. The crowd, still stunned, began to murmur. What they had thought was a mismatch, a one-sided fight, was now becoming something else entirely. There was more to this girl than anyone had realized. Vorkan's breath came in heavy gasps. He looked around the arena, at the spectators who had once laughed at her and then back at her, calm, poised, and unbroken. And in that moment, the truth began to sink in. This girl was not like the others. This girl wasn't afraid of him. Something had changed. And Vorkan knew that the fight he had assumed would be easy was now turning into something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The champion's rage. The silence in the arena had turned thick, almost suffocating. Vorkan's massive chest heaved with each breath as his fists clenched in tight balls of fury. The girl had humiliated him, taking his weapon and making him look weak in front of the entire arena. The roar of the crowd had faded into a distant, muffled hum in his ears. The only thing he could hear was the furious pounding of his own heart, echoing in his mind. He had always been in control. Always. His power, his skill, no one had ever stood a chance against him. And now this girl, this tiny figure, had made him look like a fool. His pride burned hotter than the sun above them, and with a roar that rattled the very air, he lunged forward again, his fury turning into reckless abandon. The crowd's murmur grew louder, sensing the shift in the fight. Vorkan's rage was evident, but it wasn't just anger. It was desperation. "Enough of this," he bellowed, his voice shaking the ground beneath him. "You think you've won, little girl? I'm going to make you regret this." His eyes were wild with fury. He charged at her like an unstoppable storm, his massive form barreling forward with all the force of a juggernaut. He was no longer thinking. He was reacting, lashing out in pure, unfiltered rage. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't even move. She stood there, waiting. Her posture relaxed but purposeful, as if she was entirely unbothered by Vorkan's sudden attack. Her calmness only infuriated him more, and with another war cry, he swung his fist toward her. The air itself seemed to shudder with the power of the blow. But this time the girl didn't dodge. Instead, she stepped to the side, moving just enough to let his fist pass by her. The force of his punch created a gust of wind that whipped through the arena, but the girl was already behind him, her body moving with a fluidity that seemed almost unnatural. Vorkan turned just in time to see her closing the gap between them, her eyes locked on him with a steely intensity. "No more games," she said, her voice quiet but somehow cutting through the din of the crowd. The words were simple, but the way she spoke them, cold, direct, sent a chill down Vorkan's spine. In that moment, something inside of him snapped. His pride, his reputation, his unshakable confidence, all of it crumbled away in the face of this girl's indifference to his fury. He wasn't the champion here. She was. And that thought, more than any blow she had struck, stung deeper than anything he had ever felt before. Vorkan roared, his rage boiling over, and he charged at her again, this time with even more raw power. But his movements were sloppy now, fueled entirely by anger. He was no longer the calculated fighter he once was. His pride had blinded him, and the girl was ready for it. She moved like a shadow, slipping past his wild swings with ease, never giving him the chance to land a hit. Her movements were so precise, so controlled, that she looked like a dancer on a stage. Each step she took was deliberate, each strike a warning. Vorkan's desperation grew. His attacks became wilder, his swings slower. The harder he tried, the more frustrated he became. The crowd had fallen silent again, every spectator now waiting for the inevitable end. They had expected him to crush her, to make quick work of the Deathworlder girl. But now they weren't so sure. The girl was no longer just dodging. She was countering. Every step he took toward her was met with a swift, sharp response. Her hands moved like lightning, redirecting his strikes, forcing him to lose his footing. His body ached with every missed attack. The audience could sense it. Vorkan was no longer the champion. He was the prey. Then, it happened. As Vorkan swung once again, his body completely out of sync, the girl moved in. She sidestepped his lunge and twisted around him, her hands coming up to grab his massive shoulder. In a single fluid motion, she pulled him off balance. Vorkan tried to recover, but his legs were already tangled, and before he knew it, she had him on the ground. The crowd gasped, their eyes wide in disbelief. This was no longer a fight. They were watching a one-sided battle. Vorkan, now on his knees, tried to push himself up, but the girl was already there, standing over him, her eyes cold and unfeeling. His body trembled with rage, but deep down, he could feel the truth creeping in. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated a Deathworlder, but there was no turning back now. He had one final chance. His rage was his fuel, and it was all he had left. The first move, Vorkan was struggling to breathe. The girl had done something no one had ever done to him before. She had taken his strength, his rage, and turned it against him. He could feel the humiliation burning inside him like a fire, each second of failure adding fuel to the flames. But despite the shame and anger, something inside Vorkan clicked. He was a champion. He had fought countless battles, defeated warriors from all corners of the galaxy, and never once had he been put in a position like this. He wasn't going to let this girl, this Deathworlder, be the one to take his title, his pride and his legacy. No, he wasn't done yet. His chest rose and fell as he struggled to control his breathing. He was battered, his muscles aching from the relentless attacks, but his mind was sharp. The crowd was silent now, waiting for the next move, unsure of what they were about to witness. The girl stood in front of him, her eyes never leaving his. She was calm, too calm. It was as if she was playing a game and this was just another round. Her every movement, every breath was measured, deliberate, like she was a predator simply toying with her prey before delivering the final blow. But Vorkan wasn't going to let that happen. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaking under the weight of his own fury. His head throbbed, his vision blurred slightly from the exhaustion, but there was no turning back. He had to make his move now. With a guttural growl, he swung his arm out, hoping to catch the girl off guard. The blow was wild, fueled by frustration, but in that moment something strange happened. The girl didn't dodge. She didn't step aside. Instead, she stepped into it. The crowd gasped, unsure of what they were seeing. But the girl's timing was flawless. She let Vorkan's punch come at her just inches from her face, and then, at the last possible moment, she moved. Her hand shot up and caught his wrist with the precision of a surgeon, her grip tightening around his arm with a force he hadn't expected. The impact of his punch was absorbed by her arm, but instead of retreating, she pulled him. Vorkan, already off balance from his own momentum, tried to push against her, but it was too late. She twisted his arm with a force that made his bones groan. In one smooth motion, she used his own energy to turn him around, yanking him toward her with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. Vorkan's heart raced as his feet stumbled forward, but he couldn't stop it. He tried to plant his feet to dig in, but she was relentless. With a fluid movement, she shifted her weight, her body coiling like a spring, and slammed him to the ground. The impact was brutal. Vorkan's breath was knocked out of him, and for a moment the world around him spun. His vision went dark at the edges, and the crowd's deafening silence felt like a weight on his chest. But even in the darkness, one thing was clear. He was no longer in control. She had taken everything from him in that one moment. The fight, the power, the momentum. It was all hers now. The girl stood over him, her hand still gripping his wrist, her breath even, almost casual. She looked down at him, her eyes filled with the kind of quiet intensity that made his heart skip. This wasn't the girl he had thought she was. She wasn't some fragile opponent. She wasn't just another fight. No, this was something else entirely. His mind raced, but his body wouldn't respond. The pain was sharp, like fire coursing through his veins. The girl had disarmed him. She had humiliated him. And there was no way to fix it now. In the distance, the crowd began to murmur again. But this time, it wasn't laughter. It wasn't mockery. It was something else. Something darker. Respect. He knew, even before the first shout echoed through the arena, that the crowd had started to see it too. They had begun to realize the truth. Vorkan was no longer the champion. She was. And that realization cut deeper than any blow he had taken. The girl wasn't finished. But Vorkan's pride, his strength, was. As he lay there, staring up at her, with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration, he knew this fight wasn't going the way he thought it would. It was about to end in a way he could never have predicted. The spine-snapping victory. Vorkan's vision flickered as he lay on the ground, his body aching, and his pride shattered into 1,000 pieces. He could feel the weight of the arena, pressing down on him, every eye in the stands now trained on him, waiting for what would come next. The girl had him pinned, her grip on his wrist unrelenting. Every move she made seemed effortless, smooth, calculated, as if she was performing a dance rather than a fight. Her eyes never left his, cold and focused, like a hunter preparing for the final strike. Vorkan's chest heaved with heavy breaths, his body trembling as he struggled to push himself up. He had to get up. He had to do something. Anything. But his limbs felt heavy, and his strength was fading fast. The girl's grip was like iron, and her presence towered over him. She wasn't just strong. She was precise, methodical. She was the kind of fighter who saw everything before it happened. Not so confident now, are you? The girl's voice was calm, almost bored, but there was an edge to it that made Vorkan's heart race. She wasn't mocking him. She was simply stating a fact. The crowd was silent, the tension so thick that it seemed to suffocate the very air around them. Vorkan's mind raced, trying to figure out what he could possibly do to turn the tide. His pride was still there, burning deep inside him, but it was drowning in the overwhelming realization that he had no control. And then, just as the last sliver of his hope began to fade, he saw her shift. The girl moved with the quiet precision of a predator closing in on its prey. It was the smallest shift in her posture, a subtle change, but it was enough to send a jolt of fear through him. He tried to move, tried to push her away, tried to fight, but his body refused to obey. Every muscle screamed in protest, each breath more labored than the last. It was clear now. There was no escaping this. The girl leaned down, her grip tightening on his arm. She moved with deadly purpose, her eyes flicking to his spine for just a moment. And in that instant, Vorkan knew exactly what was coming. The girl's hands shifted with a speed that was almost too fast for his eyes to follow. Her fingers pressed against the base of his neck just above his shoulder blades, and before Vorkan could even react, she twisted his body with a brutal efficiency. The world around him seemed to spin, his head swimming, but all he could focus on was the sharp, unforgiving pressure building in his back. He felt something snap. A sickening crack echoed through the arena, louder than the roar of the crowd. Pain exploded through his body like wildfire, sharp and blinding. It wasn't just the physical pain that hit him. It was the realization. She had done it. She had ended him. The champion who had never been defeated, the warrior who had dominated. This arena for years was broken in 2 moves. For a heartbeat, Vorkan's world was nothing but darkness and agony. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. His body was no longer his own. And then, the crowd's reaction hit him. At first, it was a collective gasp, a sharp intake of breath that seemed to echo across the entire arena. No one, not even the most seasoned fighters, could believe what they had just seen. The arena that had once jeered at her, that had laughed at her, was now in stunned silence. The girl stood above him, her chest rising and falling slowly, as if she had just completed an effortless task. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile, she didn't need to. The silence in the arena spoke louder than any words ever could. Vorkan, still on the ground, could only stare up at her. His pride, his strength, his very identity, everything had crumbled. He could no longer move, no longer feel the rush of power he had once known. And in that silence, something else became clear. This wasn't just a victory for the girl. This was a statement. She had taken everything Vorkan had once been, and in 2 simple, swift movements had shown the world that power wasn't always about size or strength. It was about precision, strategy, and knowing exactly when to strike. The girl hadn't just won the fight. She had completely dismantled the champion's legacy. The crowd, still in shock, finally found their voices. A slow murmur started to rise, growing louder and louder as they realized what had just happened. They had witnessed something no one would ever forget.